Okay, we'll get started now. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar on Microsoft Office 365 to empower your not-for-profit. My name is Christine Hullum, and I'm from Connecting Up. And with me today, we have Marcus Harvey from Info Exchange, one of our partners, who will be taking you through some of implementation tips and also case studies on other organizations that have moved to Office 365 and the benefits. Some of you might have attended the webinar we held last week on Introduction to Office 365. So this is like pretty much the second series or the next series or the next webinar of the series. So the Introduction to Office 365 is more an overview of the different features available, but today we'll talk more about the planning of moving to the Office 365 itself and what you will need to do. So as usual, please feel free to ask any questions that you might have. Do that by typing in the question box, so we will address them as we go along. And if you have any technical difficulties, please do type them in the question box as well. Well, on that note, we do have a lot to cover, so I will hand you over to Marcus. Over to you, Marcus.
Thanks very much, Christine, and welcome everyone. It's great to have so many participants, particularly given the fact that Office 365 is now free for eligible non-profits in Australia and New Zealand. Australia was a little bit behind the eight ball in getting on the Office 365 bandwagon from a free licensing perspective from Microsoft. I'm the Consulting and ICT Services Manager at Info Exchange, and so as part of those responsibilities, my team does deploy Office 365, and so very much what we've done is developed this webinar based on our experience of helping non-profits across the sector. As Christine said, we will be stopping as we go, and I'll be checking in for questions, so please don't hesitate to slow me down if necessary. I am assuming that most of you are familiar with 365 and won't go into the details of that, although I do cover it on one or two slides. But if there's key information you need to know, don't hesitate to contact me. What we're going to talk about today, which you'll see on your screen, is first of all some of our perspectives on why ICT is important for non-profits. I'm then going to briefly talk about what the cloud is, because everyone has different perspectives, and I just want to make sure that we are in a common place, or at least you understand what our view of the cloud is. As well as talk briefly about Office 365 features. I then want to talk a lot about the benefits of 365 and about how you build the business case, because while Office 365, if you are an eligible non-profit, might be free to run, there's always effort and sometimes cost involved, particularly if you're not using volunteers, involved in the migration activity to Office 365. We'll then give 10 implementation tips that we've found have really helped organisations make the most of the environment. We'll talk briefly about a case study and some of the benefits that they found in their experience. I'll give you a list of other resources really quickly. Everyone will get this webinar, this pack after the webinar, so you don't need to madly scribble things down before we have final time for questions at the end. So, why do we see Office 365 ICT as important for non-profits? And many of the organisations we work with are operating in an environment where there is greater pressure, whether that be budgetary pressure, whether that be pressure to show the outcomes from your activities. There's an increased pressure, and with that comes the need for people to make the most of staff and volunteer time, so that when they come to work they're productive, they make a difference, they feel that they make a difference, and good technology is a real part of that. The second thing that we're seeing more and more is important is to measure and improve client and community outcomes in order to attract funding, in order to attract government grants, and in order to tell a story and attract supporters. Being able to articulate about the difference that you've made with your clients and your community is really important to making sure that your organisation is as successful as possible. And doing that, if everything is paper-based, can be quite difficult. It's much more useful, or it's much easier to tell the story if your services and the people that you support and the information about that is captured electronically. The third thing is minimising service risk. We've been doing a lot of work in New Zealand in recent times, and one of the instigators for that work was unfortunately the earthquakes in Christchurch, and being able to operate effectively irrespective of or in a reliable environment irrespective of what happens around you is really important. Now, the challenge that we see is that most non-profits feel that they spend too much on ICT and they're not satisfied with their investment. And we hear that all the time from organisations that we work with and even across the sector. And the challenge is that the ICT, any money that goes into ICT doesn't take or takes money away from people spending time, or can take money away from people spending time with service delivery. And that's where it's really important to get the maximum bang for your buck on your ICT investment. And that's why I get excited about Office 365, because it can reduce the amount of spend on your infrastructure and free it up so that you can spend in other areas. The common challenges and some of the reasons why we hear that people are unsatisfied with their ICT environment is, how do we allow staff, or how do we allow staff to stay connected with people when they're out of the office? Because many organisations have staff that work away from their main office, whether it be with clients in their homes, whether they work out and about in the community, or simply work on the move. Staying connected and sharing information with these people can be a real challenge if your IT infrastructure is situated in your central office. A second challenge often includes providing reliable and cost-effective backups. Studies have shown that non-profits don't always have reliable, robust processes, and this can be, even though it's not always difficult and it's a relatively simple process, it can be really hard to maintain off-site data backups when you're juggling those pressing priorities of assisting one's clients and community. The third challenge that we hear about is access to funding for technology, both maintaining and improving it. Many organisations rely upon grant or block funding to keep ICT up to date and supportable. Infrastructure can degrade over time if more pressing priorities mean grant funding is not available, and that can leave staff with outdated, inefficient software and infrastructure. It also becomes less reliable and more difficult to support. The third big challenge that we see in our work in the sector is getting access to affordable technical resources, and this is really important. Too often we hear of Microsoft partners being asked to investigate ICT issues in an organisation, and it turns out that the underlying cause of the problems are that they don't have appropriate technical resources available to keep infrastructure up to date and working reliably. And those challenges lead to sometimes frustration with an ICT environment. Now, before I talk about Office 365, I just want to briefly talk about the cloud. And at the simple level, the cloud is a way of accessing ICT services through the internet. At a more complex level, or at the next layer down, it's a way to provide a service that's characterised by four things: reliability, so that there's inbuilt redundancy; expandability, so that it's easy to add or remove users; usage-based pricing, so you're not dependent on capital investment to add additional staff or users. And the third one is it's accessible over the internet so that people can work anywhere. One of the things, and that really supports organisations and staff working out of the office or working where they are rather than where the infrastructure is. And that's one of the changes that we see is making a big difference to people in their daily activities. So before I jump into Office 365, InfoExchange has migrated a large range of organisations into the cloud, and you can see some of them on the screen there. But we do also install local infrastructure for many clients. Whether it's 365 or whether you need a local infrastructure, or as many organisations need, a mix of the two, that's one of the things that's really important to think about when you're designing an appropriate solution. So what is Office 365? And as I said earlier, Microsoft has announced that the E1 plan is available free of charge. The first thing is it includes professional email and shared calendaring. That's 50 gigabytes per user. The second thing is it includes instant messaging, high definition video and audio conferencing, including the ability to share screens through Link. The third thing is online storage, more than 1 terabyte per user with collaboration and document management, and it also includes strong privacy and security controls. The actual functions or the applications are seen on the right-hand side with Word Online, Excel Online, PowerPoint Online, OneNote Online, Link, Exchange Online, SharePoint and Yammer. And that's what's provided to eligible non-for-profits free of charge as part of the Office 365 E1 plan. I've put a note down the bottom that we actually recommend almost all non-profits also purchase desktop Microsoft Office products from Connecting Up. So that's your standard desktop version of Office. It could be Pro, it could be Standard, to give you the desktop versions of Word. Some organisations feel that the online versions are enough, but that's most of the organisations we work with decide to purchase those desktop products as well. So my favourite 365 features, and then I'll stop for questions at the end of this slide, and I've listed 6 here. The first one being shared calendaring and email available on mobile devices. One of the things that organisations that are still using older POP email or POP-related SMTP-related email is that they can't see each other's calendars often. And that ability to open up shared calendaring to organisations can make a huge difference and make it far more easier to book meetings, to book rooms, and to make good use of those resources without emails trying to find out are people available on a certain date. It's also much easier for people to get access to the information they need when they're on the go if they have access to email on mobile devices. My second favourite feature is intranets and file storage in SharePoint. Actually sharing information through an intranet to help everyone understand what's happening around the organisation, and to store files in SharePoint so it's accessible anywhere with an internet connection, can make a huge difference to people's productivity. The third feature that I really like is video conferencing. Video conferencing can be a boon to help you stay in contact with staff out of the office. I have staff in multiple locations, and having the ability to easily start a video conference and see people as well as at the same time as talking to them, all without interstate or international phone charges, is a great benefit that makes it feel like we're part of the one team, and you can see people in the way that they're looking when you're talking through issues. The fourth one's offline file access through OneDrive, so that you can take libraries of files available and synchronize them offline. The fifth one is the volume of storage. You get a terabyte per user of OneDrive storage. You get 50 gig of mail. And what that allows you to do is to reduce the need for archiving, but it obviously doesn't eliminate the need for good document management approaches. And the sixth one is collaboratively document editing. With SharePoint, multiple people can work on a document at once, and that can be a real benefit when multiple people need to work on a document together, or when you've got a looming deadline coming up. I'm going to open it up for questions. Christine, do we have any outstanding?
Yes, Marcus, there are a couple of questions just more on like some of the feature things. And first of all, about SharePoint specifically from Laura. So she's basically saying that she says SharePoint is not an exact replacement of a file server and that we will lose some functionality, but they haven't been able to find any specifics. Is this correct? And are you able to talk about the differences between SharePoint and a file server?
So you're absolutely correct. SharePoint is not an exact replacement for a file server. And it actually includes a lot more functionality than what file servers provide. Now, the nice thing about SharePoint is that what you can do is open it using Internet Explorer, so store files within SharePoint and open it using Internet Explorer and browse it exactly through your familiar Windows Explorer, through your familiar Windows Explorer interface. So there's the ability to do that. So it looks very similar to a file server. And so that helps people with the transition. One of the challenges, and so my suggestion, it'd be very easy to run up a demo of SharePoint and you can actually see the differences. One thing is that because the information is stored in the cloud, and I'll cover this on a later slide, if you work with large videos, or large files, or some particular file types, they're not supported in SharePoint. And so you just need to be careful. If you're just working with very standard documents, that's easy. If you're working with really large documents, or if you're working with complex access databases or other specific file types, then they may not be fully supported within SharePoint.
Thanks, Marcus. Another question.
Any other questions, Christine?
Yeah, so another question here. I've heard from Jan, I've heard some users have a problem sending emails such as attachments missing and hyperlink issues to Windows Live Mail 2011. Is this true? Can you clarify?
I haven't seen that issue or heard of that issue. We recommend the use of Outlook, not Windows Live Mail, to integrate back with Office 365. But others may have had that issue. I just haven't seen it in any of the clients or any of the organisations we've worked with.
Right. Another question from Ken, and there are actually two parts of the questions. What security is available for sensitive data stored in the cloud, as they have legal obligation to keep personal information from unauthorized access? And the second question is, does BitLocker work over OneDrive?
So Ken, I'm going to cover the security question separately. Sorry, the what protection, there's a privacy and security slide in a few minutes. And so I'll cover that. If there's still got more questions about that, we'll cover that at the end of that one. Or let us know and we'll answer it then. I haven't used BitLocker over OneDrive, so can't comment on that. I would do testing before you go down that path. In our mind, the OneDrive is still fairly complex with the synchronization, and I'm presuming you mean OneDrive for local file sync not OneDrive in the cloud. And so there need to be some further testing that was done before that's actually deployed. More than happy to take that offline if needed.
Thanks, Marcus.
Christine, were there any other questions, or shall I keep moving so I answer Ken's privacy and security questions?
I'll just ask one more before we move along. Sharon is asking if there is a limit to how many employees or employee email addresses they can have using the E1 plan before they have to pay.
Sharon, there's no limit to employee email addresses or user accounts in the E1 plan.
Yep, let's move on, and I'll ask the rest of the questions a bit later on.
Fantastic. All right. So benefits of Office 365, staff can work efficiently and stay connected anywhere because information is accessible from anywhere with an internet connection with a wider range of devices. Second thing is it's easy to connect with staff, access the latest version of a document or collaborate independent of location, and we find that really valuable for organisations that have staff in multiple locations. And the third one that's really important, and the other big one that's really important, is that staff can forget about technology and they can get on with their jobs. Server upgrades are reduced or eliminated, and that leads to lower technology costs. Backup and redundancy is no longer a headache. There's the flexibility to scale up or scale down as required. If you are successful in getting a new grant or want to move into a new area and need to onboard a range of new staff, it's easy to add them to Office 365, and you don't need to be concerned about whether or not your server has the available memory, CPU or disk space. You've got guaranteed availability of 99.9%, and over the past 3 months it's actually been closer to 99.99 in the Asia Pacific region, and security and privacy controls that only large companies have had access to in the past become much more readily available. I'll talk about that a little bit more in a second. And here we are. So in terms of privacy and security, there is very strong privacy and security controls. Some of the nice things about the Office 365 is that it includes controls around, data centers, and you've got, video monitoring and biometric access into the data center, and controls that ensure that there's good knowledge of who's accessing the information. It's much stronger in terms of physical security than any of the organisations that personally I've worked with here in Australia or New Zealand, even stronger than some of the data centres that I've seen and worked with. The second thing is privacy controls. Office 365 is accredited to ISO 27001, to the EU model clauses, to the Health Insurance Privacy Accountability Act, the Financial Institution Management Authority. There's a whole range of different international standards, privacy standards, that Office 365 is accredited to, more than other cloud environments that or cloud services that I've seen. And it was also given the tick by the 14 separate privacy commissioners across the EU, which is the first time I've seen privacy commissioners come out and give their tick to a cloud service similar to Office 365, and there are others out there like Google Apps. I've got links under both of those to a whole range of further information, so you can check that out if needed. One thing that I often get asked, you do own and retain all rights to your data, so you can get it out if you decide not to continue with Office 365. Microsoft is absolutely clear who owns it, and there's no scanning of the data to provide you targeted ads based on the data that's within there. Now, while an Australian data centre for Office 365 has been announced, It's not yet clear whether or not that will be available as part of the free E1 plan. My personal gut feel is it probably won't. That will be a paid service. And today data is stored offshore. So if that's an issue, that's something you need to be aware of. Many organisations, including the Queensland Government, have chosen to use Office 365, and so uptake is increasing, but its suitability depends on what information you intend to store and your funding agreements. I might just stop there and see if there's any further questions from Ken or anyone else about privacy and security.
Thanks, Marcus. There currently is no specific question about security. There are obviously other questions about a range of different things, but we can hold them off till the end if you like.
Okay, I'll keep going and we'll see if they're answered. So building the business case, because one of the things is, while it's a free service, there is always effort involved in the migration. And that shouldn't be ignored. And so when we work with organisations to talk about the justification for the move, here are the top 5 ways we've seen the business case to be built to justify the effort and the investment for the migration. So the first one is it reduces or eliminates server upgrades and refreshes. That saves IT support and server costs. The second one is the use of video conferencing applications and teleworking. And sorry about that. And Christine, is that all right again?
Fine, thank you.
And that allows flexibility and also reducing in travel costs. One organisation that we worked with justified the cost of their migration by the change of stopping or discontinuing a teleconferencing subscription service, which was a significant cost saving. The third is defending against hardware failure. With cloud solutions, there's no need to worry about your server failing because the data is replicated onto multiple sites, and that allows you to provide a guaranteed uptime. The collaborating effectively across organisations can lead to significant increase in efficiencies and can stop people being challenged by finding that local version and reduce the propensity for people to store files on their desktop. And the last, and that really aligns with that single source of truth as the last bullet point on that list in terms of building the business case for Office 365. So I want to run through roughly 10 tips if you're considering implementing through Office 365 as to how you can do it successfully. Number one, and this is particularly important if you have multiple locations, which is explain the benefits to staff and support them to make the change. Getting local champions can help staff make the most of new features, particularly if your organisation would get significant value out of using video conferencing or something else that staff are not familiar with. Number two is ensure your internet bandwidth and reliability is suitable. The internet becomes a lot more important for you in terms of keeping access to your files. So one of the things we'll often talk to organisations about is what's your internet bandwidth? Does it need to be upgraded? Do we need to look at reliability provisions? I say to everyone, assume that once every 3 years something will go wrong and you'll lose your internet connection. So what's your approach then? Do you need to work from a local cafe with an internet? Can staff work from home? Do you need a secondary line in? The third one is make effective use of OneDrive for offline file access, but you will need to manage sync issues because if people, while it's great and it resynchronizes when you connect back to the cloud, you do need to make sure that if people have been editing files offline and so is someone else, that that's managed appropriately. Fourth one is considering upgrading Office on your PCs. If you are migrating to Office 365, one of the questions we often ask is it also worthwhile, if you're touching each PC, upgrading to Office 2013 as part of that process? Fifth one is use an Office 365 expert to make the transition a success and to assist you with ongoing support if required. Number 6, consider local storage, and I touched on this a little bit earlier. If you share large videos or quantities of photos, one of the challenges is, because you're moving everything into the cloud, if you don't have a large connection with significant bandwidth, Office 365, the cloud is not an appropriate, as a general rule of thumb, there are always exceptions, environment to do editing of large videos or work with large volumes of really sizable files. And so consider local storage if that's something that you need to do, or invest in bandwidth. You need to make that decision. Number 7 is review your security controls and policies. One of the great things about the cloud is that the information is accessible anywhere. One of the risks in the cloud is that the information is accessible anywhere. If you're one of those rare organisations, and thankfully there's not many there, that have common passwords or that share passwords, that's not an appropriate policy or an appropriate practice to consider if you move into the cloud. And so that's why we say have a look at your security and password policies. While Office 365 does enforce strong passwords, it doesn't stop sharing of passwords. It doesn't stop people writing passwords down and sticking it on their desks or their monitors. So please review those controls if you're more lax than you should be in those areas. Number 8, Active Directory offers value for organisations with a larger number of computers. Often I'll say if you have more than 30 computers at one site, then seriously look at Active Directory services as well with a file server or similar. Headsets, and this is one always surprises me, but I do say it because it still happens a bit. If you're doing video and audio conferencing using Link, please invest in headsets. Please think about whether or not you need webcams as well. It's really hard to have a good conversation, particularly in an open plan environment, if you don't have a headset. Number 10, online collaboration spaces can be really valuable to engage your board and volunteers, and they're much easier to build within a SharePoint environment than is available through a traditional file server style environment. And number 11, yes, I know I've got 11, but I wanted to add this because I've seen it being used really well. Yammer is a great tool for collaboration, particularly for those larger, more dispersed organisations that have the need to collaborate outside of traditional team structures. I might stop for a minute again, Christine, and ask if you've got more questions you want me to talk about.
Sure. We have a couple of questions here on just a range of different things, I suppose. One is talking about how they're currently on, from Santosh. So they're currently on Google Apps with over 30 staff using document sharing, calendar sharing, etc. Is there some way to migrate to Office 365 without having to manually redo all the document sharing, calendars and everything? So some way to migrate everything to Office just as it is.
The answer is you need to look at each of the elements separately. Email migration from Google Apps to Office 365 is comparatively simple. But calendaring I haven't done from memory. It's relatively simple as well, but it can be a little bit, but as I said, I haven't looked at that one in more detail. The next step is documents. If you're going to migrate those to a SharePoint environment, you do need to design the environment and migrate to that. There are some cost-effective tools that will simplify the migration processes, both in terms of calendaring and email, Skykick being one of them that we've used before, which is in the order of $30 per user from a migration perspective. And particularly if it's a more complex file structure or if you've got group emails and some of those sorts of concepts or distribution lists that need to be migrated, there's some of the tools that really specialise and help that migration from a Google to a 365 environment would be worth looking at.
Thank you. The next question
Any more, Christine?
Oh yeah, we do have a couple here. I think there's just a bit of a lag between me talking and all that. Ruth is asking if it's possible to trial this on a limited basis before going all out.
Hi Ruth, pleased to say that you can sign up for an Office 365 trial. There'll be a link at the end, towards the end of this presentation. That gives the ability to try it out for up to 25 people. And what you can do is have a look at it, see how SharePoint works, look at what the, get a sense of the email, all those sorts of things. And there's no need to migrate your email. You can just set it up in a separate environment and try it to your heart's content. That's always what we recommend to people considering a migration, because it does give them the ability to actually get familiar with it and make an informed decision.
Thank you. Next question from Laura. She's struggling to see the overall advantage of 365 over a VPN system where we simply log on to the server. Can you shed a bit more light on that, Marcus?
Hey Laura, look, the advantage is that one, if you're working out and about, you can work without a VPN. That's good or bad. You can save VPN license costs potentially. The second is that you don't have to maintain that server and the local infrastructure, or you don't have to maintain it to the same degree. What we generally find is that people will look at that migration and do the costing and the cost-benefit analysis at the time when your local infrastructure needs to be replaced. Rather than if you've just purchased it, there's not that same benefit in migrating to Office 365. It also includes Link, it also includes Yammer, it also includes the ability to use SharePoint if you don't have that within your existing VPN environment, which can really help with a collaboration approach across the organisation.
I might just continue with two more questions before we then continue the presentation. Firstly from Paul. Paul was asking if they currently use Yammer separately, is it possible to migrate this to the Office 365 environment whenever they do that?
Paul, yes it is. I was just thinking because we've only done a couple of those. Yes it is. There's a few nuances if I remember. But I might need to get back to you on that. It's certainly possible, but part of it depends, are you using the E1 plan for Yammer, the free version of Yammer, and then the most appropriate migration approach. So there's some nuances underneath that, but we have been successful in doing that. I can investigate that further if that's key.
So the next one is from Mitzi. Some executives may use the Office 365 while most staff would continue to use the actual software. Do you envisage any issues with this?
No, I don't. So although you need to make a decision what's providing, there's so many components for Office 365 and that's where if executives, you need to make a decision about your email, and we at broad brush, unless you're really, really large, recommend you either pick Office 365 or an on-premise solution from an email perspective. 98% of the organisations shouldn't have two environments. From a SharePoint perspective, you could put the executives up in a separate area, but there's complexities within that. If you're considering that style of approach, it'd be very easy to use Link just for the execs and not the staff. So it's much easier. It depends on what you want to split apart. If it's just Link for the execs or just a SharePoint environment for the executives, then that's relatively simple to do. If you want to do some more complex hybrid environments with both on-premise and cloud deployment, that would need to be designed well to make sure it's easy for people to use.
Thanks, Marcus. We might hold on to the rest of the questions for until a bit later, so we can just continue with the presentation.
Right. So, a quick case study. Regional Sports Network of Victoria is the peak body that supports 9 independent organisations across regional Victoria. They do a whole range of different activities, very much supporting locally based community sport. It involves training, they do information advice, skill development. They cover a population of about 1.5 million regional and rural Victorians, network of about 9,000 sport and rec clubs. And so there's a very significant geographic disbursement need to support people everywhere, and also there's the need to support organisations of significantly varied sizes, some with only a few staff, some with 20 or more. And the challenge that RSNV had was how do they foster collaboration and information sharing across that network. So they went towards Office 365. They're using Exchange Online, Link and SharePoint. So those 3 main areas with a bit of SkyDrive, now OneDrive. Benefits that the organisation reported included much lower technology risk. The system has guaranteed backups because they, despite the best intentions of the world, they found it difficult to make sure that backup happened every day on the numbers, and it was always taken off site, and it was a very significant benefit for them that was just automated and they never needed to worry about it. They got time savings in the order of 10 to 15%. That was predominantly from reduced travel because they used video conferencing much more often, although not all the time, and improvements in information accessibility. So staff are much more easily able to find information in the cloud rather than searching what used to be individual mailboxes or PCs. And the third one, which was really pleasing to hear back, was that they also had happier staff. Staff work at RSNV because they want to develop and are passionate about community support, about community sport. And prior to Office 365, it was hard to provide local clubs and sporting organisations high quality advice because it could be difficult to find the right information. These days, staff could find what they need and they can give much better advice and support to RSNV clients, and that had the unexpected, when we went to implement Office 365, benefit that they're less frustrated and feel that they're providing a much more valuable service to their clients. And that made a real significant difference to them. I said earlier that I'd list a range of resources, and here they are. There's one of the things that we're doing in partnership with Connecting Up and TechSuite New Zealand is providing a readiness assessment service, which will help organisations think about, are they ready to use Office 365? What do they need to think about in terms of SharePoint migration? What about Link, internet connectivity, existing servers, those sorts of things. So there are some links for those organisations that are interested in a readiness assessment. The second one is, I mentioned earlier that if you want to give it a go, you can sign up for the trial. And so the Office 365 link for non-profits is the second bullet point on the list, and there's a W missing from that one. So I'll fix that before I send out the pack, but hopefully people will work out what was wrong with that anyway. The third one, we haven't had this one asked today, but we do get this one asked semi-regularly. What's the difference between the E1 and the E3 plan? And so there's a link there that gives that information. The Australian privacy principles for those that need to think more about the privacy and privacy concerns are linked there, along with the Microsoft Trust Centre. 98% of questions that I get asked from CEOs or senior managers about privacy and security are answered in that Microsoft Trust Centre in a way that's non-technical and easy to understand. And the last one on the list there is a website, improveit.org, which is designed to help non-profits get the most out of technology. It doesn't cover 365 specifically, but it does cover broader how do you think about planning, and provides a range of good practice resources. So I wanted to make you aware of that as well. Some final thoughts. Office 365 enables you and your organisation to share information, to work effectively irrespective of location, to reduce infrastructure costs, to telework, and to improve disaster readiness. And it does that in a way that can also reduce your needs to have high quality skilled technical resources. So it reduces that need for that technical expertise, doesn't eliminate it, but it makes it a whole lot easier. And so that's why, from our perspective, Office 365 can be of significant value to organisations, and help them focus more on their clients and communities and less on their infrastructure. I'll hand back over to you, Christine, for more questions.
Thank you, Marcus. So there are a couple of questions here queued up from before, so I'll start from a couple of the basic ones. So you talked briefly about trial before. Is that for 30 days?
It is for 30 days. If you are eligible, it's also very easy just to take to get the eligibility and continue to use that in a trial-like environment without an actual migration.
So, for sorry, go on.
The second thing is, if you don't want to do that, you can also sign up for a second trial. You just lose your original instance.
So a follow-on question from that, from Brian. So can the trial be moved to live, or is the data wiped or refreshed?
No, the trial can be moved to live. The data is not refreshed. If you are eligible, you then keep going with the full version.
Great. A few questions about Active Directory, and I think we got some of these in last week's webinar as well. I'm not sure if it's the same person, but there are two questions. First from from Frank. Can Active Directory sync with Office 365 be used to secure files, such as use AD security groups on files or folders in 365?
Yes, you can. You can sync security groups from Active Directory along with all your user details, usernames, etc. That can sync up to Office 365 and be used to control the security within SharePoint.
So the second question related to Active Directory from Philippa is, how do we eliminate the need for a local server in relation to Active Directory?
We have plenty of clients that don't have a local server, and so you don't need Active Directory. It all comes down to what you know. So for instance, if an organisation comes to us and says we've got 6 users, we would almost without fail say it's probably not cost effective to put a local server in place. Go with an Office 365 environment. We have clients with, if someone came to me with 40 users all on one site, I would say you might, and so that's relatively easy. I would say then for those 40 users on one site, you might want to consider an Active Directory server. It depends on your disbursement. We have some clients with 70 to 80 staff that don't have any local servers, and they work quite effectively and efficiently.
So a few questions here about backup. So I'll just combine the questions together. So can you explain the options? If it's, say, a file is deleted, how can it be restored from backups? And also, is there an ability to go back to a point in time, or is the restore only available of the most recent version?
So there's a couple of things there. So there's a recycle bin within SharePoint that staff can go in and recover their own files. That recycle bin is only valid for, I should double check this because I think it might have changed recently, a minimum of 30 days. It might have recently increased or be about to increase closer to 90 days. So there is a recycle bin. If you don't restore it within that time frame, you have lost the file. So that's from deletions. The other thing you can easily do is turn on version management within SharePoint, and that's what we do with many of our clients. And that then keeps every version of a file, or can keep significant versions of files, so that you can easily roll back to previous versions. And that's very easy to turn on, and there's so much space within Office 365 that generally doesn't cause any problems whatsoever. So I can readily roll back to a file from yesterday, from a month ago, from 6 months ago.
Thanks, Marcus.
Does that answer the question, Christine?
Yes, it does. Thank you. Just briefly, Brian would like to know if there is a Mac OS X client for file access.
So you can use, for file access, you can use Internet, I was about to say Internet Explorer. You can use Safari, you can use a browser of your choice to access the files, and they work without an issue. At this point in time, there isn't a version of OneDrive, so you can't synchronize your files offline on the Mac. Those clients that we work with that need it usually run a Windows VM inside their Mac to get that. I've heard that there is a new version of Office for Mac due out either late this year or early next year, because the current version is 2011. The rumour I would be exceedingly is that that will include a version of OneDrive for offline file sync, but I've got no confirmed. That's what I'm expecting, but I haven't got that confirmed.
Thanks, Marcus. A question from Pete: will it work with Office 2010 or only 2013?
It'll work with Office 2010. You just need to upgrade, not upgrade, make sure that you've got the appropriate service packs installed. If you've got Windows Update automatically turned on, that would have happened by itself.
And how about access with iPads and iPhones?
So you can access files and emails using the browser on, let me take that in 2 steps. So iPads and iPhones, you can connect up email, no issues whatsoever, and it just runs natively in the local mail application. There is a link client for instant messaging and video conferencing. That works fine as well. For access to files from iPads and iPhones, there's 2 options. You can either install a SharePoint client or you can install access through the web browser to access files within SharePoint, but you need a live internet connection for that to work, and you can use the Office online apps to edit files that way if you want to. The E3 plan includes an iPad version of the Office application, so it's a full iPad version of Word, Excel, PowerPoint, etc.
So a question from Ken here: how do you manage appropriately syncing when there are offline edits, particularly if multiple people edit offline?
And the answer is users need to manage that themselves. There's no central management for that. So when someone reconnects, so if they've edited a file and they reconnect, and then what it does is it starts synchronizing. The client will do that in the background automatically. It will then prompt the person for these files have been edited by someone else while you were editing them. And what that means is the user then needs to decide which is the master. Do I replace the server version with my version? Do I replace my version with the server version? Or do I work through and merge those 2 changes? But it will prompt them to use it. But that's where, if you do use offline file access, you do need to educate staff in that. While it's fairly intuitive, if people don't have that discipline of working through that, they will get frustrated.
We have a really good, very, I guess, specific question here from Kate about OneDrive. So basically, I keep hearing it is easier to access and find information with 365, yet I understand OneDrive with the limit of 1 terabyte per user is controlled by each user as opposed to existing file server with one storage area for everyone to share. So how does this make information access easier? And what happens when someone is away and we need to continue work in their area and they have their info on their OneDrive?
Great question, Kate. What we recommend, and I didn't say this actually, what we recommend is that you use SharePoint as the replacement for your file server, not OneDrive. Okay, so for your shared file information, you use SharePoint. And that's the area that you store team documents and you store all those sorts of things. And you get a lot of space within SharePoint as well. And so it's SharePoint that we recommend people use, not OneDrive for shared document use. OneDrive we recommend people use only as a personal storage area. So for instance, if I have files that I don't want to share with the rest of the organisation, but they're still organisational in nature, that's what we recommend OneDrive is used for. And that's simply because, as you say, it's more a personal space. You can share OneDrive files with others, but the security gets relatively complex relatively quickly.
Thanks, Marcus. That would be very, very helpful to know, and that's a good lead on to the next few questions, which are about SharePoint. So firstly, from Laura, is there a limit on SharePoint's end on the amount of data that can be moved across in one day? For example, if we have 200 gigabyte of data and 40 by 40 bandwidth, are you able to say roughly how many days it would take to migrate all of the data?
Not off the top of my head, no. You need to do the calculation. It all comes down to, even if you've got 40 by 40 bandwidth, that may well not be guaranteed because you may be, it may not be a one-to-one contention ratio. And there, I have seen some, but we've been able to push, 200 gig of data you should be able to push up over a weekend, assuming your contention ratios aren't an issue. But if that's a significant, I would always recommend before you do that sort of work, do a test overnight or over a weekend to see, and you can do that with a trial site. You can see the throughput that you're getting and then plan accordingly.
So the next
you
question...
can do the calculations as well. Sorry, I will just say you can do the calculations, but I wouldn't trust it because the internet is not guaranteed throughput, and it does depend what other people are doing on the internet and on the links between here and the SharePoint site.
Thanks, Marcus. Just the next question on SharePoint. Does SharePoint on Office 365 allow you to create workflow as it originally did?
Yes, it does. It absolutely allows you to create workflows.
So we have about 3 more questions left. Firstly from Ruth, an organization without a server would be using a P2P network locally. Are there any disadvantages to this?
If they're using a peer, the 2 disadvantages that I've seen with biggest ones with peer-to-peer networking is one, everyone generally, or backup becomes more complex, and so everyone either has to back up each of their PCs separately, and the second is security can become more complex. So they're the 2 big ticket items that I've seen are an issue. The peer-to-peer networking doesn't provide an email server and shared calendaring and all those sorts of features as well.
Great. So a question, just going back to the whole suite, are you able to pick the various tools they want to use? For example, if they just want to use Link, or do you need to have the whole suite?
Yeah, great question. I'm actually going to update the presentation to make that clearer. You can pick and choose anything you want. So if you, I'll just go back. If you just want to use Link, you can deploy it just for Link. If you just want to use Exchange, you can deploy it just for Exchange. What we generally recommend is start with something simple, add more down the track. Don't go all, because that just keeps things simpler and gets people on board and familiar with it, and then you can add more.
Thanks. So we had an extra question while we talk, but let's just go first about the E3 plan. Can you clarify what the discount price is for E3?
Oh, off the top of my head, it's $4.50 per user per month, but I may be quoting New Zealand pricing. It'll be in that link. It's in that link here, the Office 365 for non-profits.
Great. Do you have top 3 tips for preparing users for SharePoint?
Engage them in the design is my top tip. So if you're designing a SharePoint environment, engage a group of users or managers or people that are passionate in the design process. That will then ensure that things are easy to find and they get value out of. That'll be number 1. Number 2, if you're changing the way that you expect them to work, then provide them with some training or some guidance as to what the way of working is. And number 3, make sure that when you move to SharePoint, if you've got a mess on your file server, don't just migrate the mess to SharePoint. Clean it up and think about what should be there and what the right structure is.
So, there are a couple more questions coming through. So we might just, for information for everyone, we might just go slightly over time just to make sure we answer all those questions. We always get a lot of questions for Office 365, as long as you don't mind, Marcus.
No, I'd love to.
Sure. So Kate's just wondering how to manage user access for shared local resource, for example, Office copy, print machine.
Sorry, can you say that again?
How can you manage user access for shared local resources such as the copier, print machine, printer?
Okay. So if you don't have, so there's one of 2 ways of doing that. Most printers, if the printer has a network connection, then you could potentially set it up with direct IP-based printing, and we've got a lot of clients that take that approach if they've got a small to medium-sized office. You then need to configure that on each PC individually. All right? So because the other option is you put a server in or a cheap print server in, that will allow that to happen as well. Most of our clients go down to a direct IP printing route and installing the drivers and the configuration directly on each of the PCs.
Can you have some users on E3 and some users on E1 in the same organization?
Yes, you can, and we find that the E3 users are less than 10%. If there's any at all within an organisation. We find it quite rare for people to go down the E3 plan. Every time they have, most of the users are on E1.
Just the last question I have right now from Vivian. She would just like to confirm that if you don't have a desktop version of Office 2013, then any files created in OneDrive or SharePoint default would save to temporary internet files as a default unless you instruct otherwise.
If you don't have the desktop versions of 2013, then you would be using the online versions of Word, Excel, etc. When you're using the online versions, you can save that to OneDrive if that's what you've got configured, or you can save that to your SharePoint site, or you can save that to your desktop. So you can save it to one of those three places. It doesn't have to go to the SharePoint, to the temporary internet file area.
And you talked before about that it's quite rare to have an E3 user. Can you give an example of what kind of, who would be likely to use an E3?
Yeah, if you want the Office application, so Word, Excel, PowerPoint, the full application on an iPad or an iPhone, that's one example, rather than just the web app. Another example is E3 includes some significant legal hold and archiving functionality that was designed for Sarbanes-Oxley in the US. If you have some significant audit requirements and want that over an email system, that's the second reason we've seen people go for E3. The third reason we've seen people pick E3 is because they want to stop worrying about the desktop, buying and managing the desktop applications, and because E3 comes with the ability to download and install on demand those desktop apps. That's the third reason.
Right. Can you work on documents from a local file server and save back to that server using the 365 online versions of Word, Excel, etc.?
I'm 99% sure, but I haven't tried that recently.
And do you have any rough idea on when the Australian data centre is expected?
No, I don't. I'm sorry, I've got no inside information on that. My best guess is next calendar year, but that's only my best guess, and take it with a grain of salt.
Great. So that's the last question we have. Well, thank you very much, Marcus, for actually, just really quickly, one came up just now. Is there a license limit for the MS 2013 Pro?
For the which, sorry?
Microsoft 2013 Pro. I assume that's the Office 2013.
So if you're using if you're using 2013 Pro purchased from the Connecting Up, that's the standard box product, which you install on your PC, and you need to go within those licenses. It's a per user style license for the E3 plan, if that's what the question related to, which can be installed on multiple devices, so for instance home and work, but it is limited to that user.
Just clarification on storage as well for SharePoint. It seems to offer not much storage if not using OneDrive. Is it just 10 gigabyte plus 500 megabytes, or is that wrong?
You can buy, where's my list? It is what was said earlier, so that's it's about 10 gigabytes plus 100 meg per user. We have had some, you can easily buy more, and it's relatively cost effective, and so that's another option as well. I think 2 clients out of the 80 or so we've worked with have purchased additional storage, so it has been relatively rare, but it does depend on your volume, your file volumes.
Thanks, Marcus. So thank you very much for your insight. I'm sure it has been useful for everyone. Thank you, everyone, as well, for all your questions. I trust all of those questions were useful for everyone else in the webinar as well. I forgot to mention earlier on that this webinar is being recorded, so you will get access to the recording and also the slides afterwards. I will send you a follow-up email with that. Other than that, if you missed out on the Introduction to Office 365 webinar where with Ryan, where he'll take you through the different features and benefits of each like link, SharePoint, etc. in a bit more detail, the next session for that will be on the 17th of July, so that's more of an introductory level. But we are running these sessions quite a few times this year, so keep a lookout on new dates coming up if you'd like to join more. And once again, thank you, Marcus, and thanks everyone, and we hope to see you at another webinar. Enjoy the rest of your day. Bye.